Welcome to our symposium. We, over the last 5 years, have been amassing an impressive body of videotaped presentations where together we're building a narrative that's going to make a difference 50 years from now, 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now. We are reclaiming our narrative as women who make art. We're owning the story. We're changing the outcome. And that's what these seminars help do. These seminars help tell our story to a larger public. It's so important. Thank you for being a part of our 25 and 25 initiative. If you're not familiar with it, it's simple. We want to create 25 museum exhibitions featuring the work of women over the next 25 years. And we are well underway. So a round of applause to everyone who's been involved with that. Betsy, thank you, and the Steamboat staff for your gracious welcome here. Honestly, this whole place has such a kind vibe and welcoming atmosphere that this is one of the nicest places we've ever been, and we really appreciate it. Thank you. I'm excited to be introducing you today to 4 important women who are doing very different but very interesting work. They are as different as they can be, but when you put the 4 of them together on a stage over the course of the day, as we will, what you're ending up with is something as, well, really a force of nature, as elemental as earth, as water, as fire, as air. These women bring so much to share with you today, beginning with Heide Presse. Now, you've seen her incredible room in the exhibition where you can see the costumes and the drawings and the paintings, and you have a sense now of this journey that she's embarked upon to tell the story of women, again, to tell the story of women whose stories don't often get told. And over the course of being here, I've had the chance to get to know Heidi, and I've discovered she's one of the most grounded, self-effacing, kindest people I've ever met. And I think we'd call Heidi the element of earth because her art is grounded in solid, meticulous detail and research and fidelity and a compassion and passion to tell the story of the women who settled this country in the 19th century, one woman in particular. I asked Heidi if she'd learned anything surprising or new over the course of this project. And as I think is in keeping with who she is, she really turned inward and was reflective and sent me all kinds of notes and observations. And wouldn't you know it, one of the things that surprised her the most that she learned is how much cooperation and help she got from other historians, from people who do everything from help her with the costumes to the reenactors to the historical parks and settings for her paintings. So she's built a team of people to get out there and help her tell us this story of the forgotten women who crossed the country. Now, of course, I'm going to let Heidi herself tell you about this project. So without adding anything further, I'm excited to introduce Heide Presse, a noted and accomplished Western artist.
Hi, everyone. This is going to be a very casual talk. I'm just going to let you in on some of my creative process and talk a little bit about the project I'm working on. And I'd also like to take this opportunity first to thank AWA and the Steamboat Museum for giving me this opportunity. And my voice is a little rough, so. To show you my work and to have the exhibit in the museum. So it's really a nice opportunity. I'm going to start with a very brief bio of how my journey to how I became an artist. And I imagine it's really not that different from many of you. So I was born into a family where really I was the only creative one, and I had no artistic influence. I just knew that I liked to create things. And in school, I was always the one that was singled out as the artistic one, and I went on to earn a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Graphic Design, and that led me to be a commercial artist. And I very quickly grew bored with that. But I really had no thought of being a fine artist as a career. The emphasis was always to be in the commercial end of things to make money. I worked as a commercial artist probably for about 5 years after graduation. And then in '86, my husband was transferred. We lived in Texas, and he was transferred to Michigan, and I used that as an opportunity to dump anything commercial art. And I ended up, excuse me, I ended up throwing myself in Michigan. We had an older home, so I threw myself into restoring that house and learned how to do stained glass windows and just kind of had some fun for 2 years. And then we went to Florida. And when we got to Florida, I started to get to where I wanted to start painting. In college, I had developed a love for watercolor. So I started painting in watercolor. And the first thing I did in '89 was to enter the Arts for the Parks competition. And my experience with Arts for the Parks is what I really consider to be the beginning of my painting career. And the Arts for the Parks was really kind of good to me. Arts for the Parks lasted, if you're not familiar with it, it was based in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. It was the first thing that took me out west. And it ran for 20 years. And I had probably, in that 20-year run, I was in 14 of the years and probably had 20-something paintings in the top 100 and earning 8 awards eventually. And I also got good sales. So that was a good experience for me as a painter. But, and also during those years working in watercolor, I did all the watercolor societies around the country, American Watercolor, National Watercolor, the state societies, but it really wasn't a good way to make money. So good for awards and being in shows and getting experience, but it was not a good money-making venture, really. And so I started to think that publishing might be a good way to make to have a career. And I started submitting to publishers, got a contract with the Greenwich Workshop up in Connecticut. And that, it's kind of funny because when I started with them in '98, I very quickly realized that industry had started a slow spiral downward. Typical, right? But even though it wasn't a good money-making experience, it taught me, it opened the door to other fine art opportunities. So it was really valuable in that respect. I met, as you can imagine, so many well-known successful artists, formed friendships, and that started my journey into working with galleries and invitational museum shows. So I'll stop there with the bio and start with the slides. Oh, I'm supposed to go this way, sorry. Okay. Let's see, a couple samples of my work. I'll start with showing you my studio. My studio in Florida is an addition that we built on, it's off of our kitchen. And it's extremely messy right now, so I didn't really go into it to take the picture. And you can see paper on the floor, but I'm really messy when I'm very, very busy, and I've been really busy. But these are some antique doors that I put up that I love. And then I have a pretty good-sized room where I do most of my painting. I have a lot of my props and things in there. And then that's my palette, which I left before coming here. So These are more pictures from my studio. I like a lot of built-in shelves because I like to see what I have when I want to set up a painting or do a still life. I like to be able to walk around and see what I have and choose. Otherwise, I forget what I have. So these are pictures that I took because the Booth Museum came through on a tour, so it was all clean, so I took pictures. But anyway, so that's just some of the things. And what you see here is like what I have is a lot of these are antique items, but I also have I obtain really well done reproductions that you really can't tell the difference unless you're an expert. Oh, and this up here is, I don't know if you can see the dark side clearly, but this is like a sample when I set up, I have a lot of windows, and I like to set up still lifes. I really like to do still lifes, and you'll see some examples of those. But so I just set it up. I like to work with natural light. And on the other side, you see if you can see it, it's really messy, because I always make a disaster of a mess when I set up still lifes. And examples of more things in my house. This is like in the living areas of our house, not my studio. Like in my dining room, I love early 1800s transferware, so I'm always buying it when I can find affordable pieces. Reference books all over the place. That one row is just on sewing and textiles and quilting. This bottom picture here is just one corner of what used to be our study. It's a small room. And I really was just increasingly running into the problem of storage for all my frames. And so in this small room, and it's got really high ceilings, so we bought like these steel shelves that go to 12 feet high. And I store all of my frames in them like books on a shelf. And then I have like all of my costumes and fabrics and sewing stuff in this room. That stuff's not in my painting studio. It got to be crazy, so I had to move it out. Now I'm showing you, because I'm figuring that a lot of you are not familiar with my body of work, so I'm going to show you a little bit of the work that I've done through the years. These are watercolors. This one is an oil. This is actually one of the first oils I did, but it shows you how much I like to do still lifes. All in natural light, just the type of thing I like to do. These are some earlier pieces, and you can already see a historic influence. Like some of these are arts. This was Arts for the Parks. This was Arts for the Parks. This was a historic commission that I did, and one of my first, this is oil, and that's pencil, but the rest are watercolors. I switched to oil in around 2006 and haven't looked back. And then these are samples of more current work, and they're all oils. Okay, now I'll start. People are always asking me, like, can you read? Oh, sorry about that. Can you read the quotes on the bottom? No. Okay. I can't either, so I can't read them. I can't see them clearly, and I don't know them by heart. But this is my project. My project is titled We Set Our Faces Westward, One Woman's Journey, 1839 to 1848. And these are my main models. The journal writer is named Keturah Belknap, and so that's my Keturah, her husband George, and their 4-year-old son Jesse. He was 4 when they went to Oregon. But like Kathy touched on, my main reasons for doing this is to tell the story of just an average woman, because I like to paint just everyday life. That's my interest in history, is how just your everyday person lived. And I'm not so much interested in famous faces or battles and battalions and, all that kind of stuff doesn't interest me so much. But I like to know how people lived. And so people always ask me, why and when I got interested in historical subjects. So it's a hard question for me to answer because it was a very gradual thing. And I guess I've always been attracted to older things because I like the aesthetics of them better than modern things. It just appeals to me. I go to antique markets and I would just pick up things that just interested me. No reason for it, I just liked it. And so it's just a personal preference. But I guess I started with history stuff with the Arts of the Parks because, you know, if you're not familiar with the show, you had to do national park sites. So my thing is I wanted to do figurative and architectural. So I started visiting a lot of national park sites and historical reenactments, but at that time I had no understanding of, I assumed that the reenactors were dressed accurately, but I've since learned that you can't trust that, but that's another story. But that got me started. And then in 2006, I was asked to submit paintings for a corporate commission in Virginia, which required historical accuracy. And I was a bit reluctant to take that on, but then I thought, you know, this is a challenge, and it's something that really interests me. And so I started to do it, and I eventually completed 6 paintings, but from 2006 to 2008, I spent 2 hard years of trying to figure out, how am I going to do this? How am I going to figure out, without really pestering artist friends of mine who know like colonial stuff and do it. I didn't want to bug and have artist friends spoon feed me. You know, I wanted to learn it myself. And so I just eventually just found these wonderful women who are historians and dressmakers and reenactors, and they mentored me and they liked what I was trying to do, and you know, I just eventually, that started my journey. And in the process of learning that, I learned that the best way to learn is primary sources. So I started reading journals, which led me to doing this project, and it inspired me. And when I read Couture's journal, it's just all these mental images, you know, and so I just really kind of gradually decided that I think I'd like to do a large project based on this. But I didn't really know if I was going to be able to achieve the logistics of doing such a thing and getting my reference. And that just all kind of fell in my lap. So it worked out. But to tell you a little bit about Couture, she was born in 1820, and she lived to be 93, actually. But in 1839, when she was 20, she married George. They lived in Ohio, and then she left with George 2 weeks after her marriage to go to Iowa, because they wanted to farm open prairie land rather than the dense forest that they had in Ohio. So they farmed a claim until 47. And then in 47, the family decided to go to Oregon. And those things are actually her journal entries based on those life decisions. And then in April of 48, they all left to go to Oregon. So, all right, now I'm going to just go through the various methods I use in my creative process to create a historical subject painting. And this is what the people who mentor me instilled and pounded into my head. They said, only look at primary sources. Do not study other reenactors, only primary sources. So I'm going to show you some examples of how I do research. First, photographic images. It's the real people. One of my friends that taught me period sewing, she refers to him, which is a good term actually, as the original cast. She said, only look at the original cast. This is the original cast right here. This picture is an example, like all of us who strive for historic authenticity look for photographic images with material culture. This is from 53, I think, 1853. So, you just develop an eye for what is right. And then you can seek out the right things for your props. These two images were given to me by a museum director. I don't know if you knew, because I didn't know this until last year, because they haven't really been published much anywhere, if any. Albert Bierstadt his first journey west was in 1859, and he and his brother took lots of photos, and these are two of them. And this one shows, you might be able to read the captions, but this one shows two men. They would be connected to military because you can see U.S. on the cover of the wagon, so they would be military trained. But you can see like the cap he's wearing is a mechanic's cap, no cowboy-looking caps on the Oregon Trail in the 50s and 40s. He's shoeing a horse, and I love this image. You can see two little girls. They're in a wagon on the Missouri River waiting to ferry across to start their journey west. And you can see a dog right here, but I love this little girl because she's wearing this huge sunbonnet, the way it's supposed to be, completely covered the face, because they're there they protect that they didn't want the sun on them, so they're big bonnets. And she's got this dress on that has an enormous plaid pattern. It's huge. And that's very appropriate for the 40s and 50s. That was popular. And it's probably also extremely colorful. But I love this image. This is also one of my absolute favorite images. It was taken by a photographer of the time, a wet plate photographer named Charles Savage. I got this scanned from the Latter-day Saints Library, who are, all these places, museums, libraries, are usually very generous in sending you stuff for research. But I can study this for like an hour because I love to look at all the individual faces. You can tell easily which ones did the bulk of the labor, which ones, like him, was probably a farmer with his child. This one looks like a businessman. This is from 1866, and it's just like, if you know the clothing, she's got on an extremely common jacket called palto. So very, very 60s. But anyway, they're a group of Mormons on South Pass in Wyoming, and this is their camp. Another picture. Charles Savage was traveling with that train. They were headed to Salt Lake City. And this is also an example of the type of images that I like to study. Again, Liz told me original cast only. And so she said, because when I first started that corporate commission, I used to always ask her, how is the dress supposed to look? What length should it be? Trying to understand. And she was just like, Heidi, just look at hundreds of images of the original cast, and you will develop an eye as to what is period. So that's what I do. Look at their hair. This is like classic 40s. Look at this. You'll notice in my exhibit, I decided to include a 4-year-old boy form dressed in tween clothes, which were tunics and trousers, and these 3 little boys are wearing tunics. He's wearing a button suit, very common. And this is what little boys looked like mid-century. No suspenders and shirts. Jackets, shirts buttoned all the way up to the neck. Very great variety of hats. Mostly the caps, like you may notice in my exhibit. It's called a mechanic's cap. And then another reference tool I use is studying genre art. And I only study genre art that's painted by artists who lived during that period. So these are 4 examples of that. George Caleb Bingham, William Rainey. I can't remember the artist name of those. I can't read them, but those are 4 of my favorite paintings. Okay. Is it going to take a while to load? Oops, whoops. All right. All right. Another valuable research tool is to study original clothing. Look at it online. Museum collections have tons of it. But more valuable than that is seek out to look at it in person, because you'll be surprised at how colorful it is and what the fabrics feel like and the wide range of fabrics that they had that we do not have today. So anyway, so that's what I do. Now I'm going to show you some examples of things that I have made and the inspiration, the the original inspiration. These 2, oops, sorry about that. This bonnet and this bonnet are both in the exhibit. They're corded bonnets, which is a thin cotton cord sandwiched between 2 pieces of fabric and sewn in tightly. It looks fiddly, but it's really easy to do. Trust me. This is a pattern for a corded bonnet. I think it's from the 1850s, I'm not sure. I don't remember, but mid-century. Showing a pattern for bonnets. This was from a popular women's magazine called Godey's Ladies Magazine. It ran pretty much through the 19th century. It's a good source for research. And then this is an original bonnet, which is my influence for this one. And I thought I would include some of my reference photos of people and kids that I have photographed. And all of these are wearing clothes that I sewed myself, except for this dress. And this is a little boy. I know you probably think it's a girl, but infants were dressed identically. There were no gender differences at that time. The only thing in here that I did not make is this cap. This is a cap from the first half of the 1800s. It's really pretty. It's got all this white work. So I drag it out and use it sometimes. But anyway. And then this is a sample of how I do a sewing project. I wanted to make a quilted petticoat. So these are like samples that I studied. They're like from museum collections, on images online. This is a genre painting. I think it's William Rainey. And clearly this woman who's on the trail is wearing a quilted petticoat. And then this is in the exhibit. It's on the dress form, and it's a quilted petticoat that I made myself. And the steps I took. It's machine put together, but it's hand quilted and finished. I really love quilts, and I don't really necessarily have to make quilts for paintings, but it's kind of an excuse to do a sewing project. And it's also I like having my other creations within a painting creation, if that makes sense. It's kind of fun. But I buy antique quilts, but they're expensive. So if I want something new and I can't find something affordable and I'm in the mood, I'll just make one. I don't make them often though, because it just takes too much time. But on the right are examples of blocks of original quilts, and then this is mine that I made. It's just basted here. It's not quilted yet, but I love the applique floral quilts of the early 1800s to mid-1800s. I love the quirkiness of them. So this is my first attempt at applique. I took a class, and When I dive into new things, I like to do something challenging, otherwise I get bored. So that's kind of complex, and the blocks are 24 inches. So, but it was fun. This is another quilt that I made recently, a different technique. The original quilt here is in the Shelburne Museum in Vermont. And this is from an 1835 Godey Ladies magazine, which shows how old this pattern is. And in fact, Martha Washington made a hexagon quilt. It's just a different, just more diagonal. But this pattern's been around for years. And the method I used was paper piecing, which I had never done before. And I thought it was going to be a nightmare, but it really was actually quite easy and a bit addictive. And it's portable, so you can carry it around. And these are some examples of paintings I've done using quilts. Okay, and this is an example of a painting I did featuring a quilt, and this is the inspiration. I'm fascinated with the concept of, they're called friendship quilts, where individual people each make a block and they either sign it or they write a verse or draw a picture in indelible ink and or permanent ink. And then this particular quilt I think it was 1857. It's 1850 something, but it was made and presented to a couple upon their journey west as a parting gift and a remembrance of the friendships. So, and now I'm going to just briefly show you how I put together historic subject paintings where I have to kind of make it up. The stagecoach painting. The first step was photographing the stagecoach, which is in the Booth Museum of Western Art in Cartersville, Georgia. I fell in love with this original stagecoach. Did research on it, where that stagecoach went, decided I wanted to put people in it, decided how I wanted to crop it. So the next step was to photograph my models. And this is really just the easiest way to get it done efficiently. I needed to create a situation where the models could comfortably pose and have something solid to lean on and, in the right light, that sort of thing. So when I did my drawing and my composition, I could fit everything together, convincingly. So actually my son was home at the time. This is him posing for me as well. Because, you're not safe when you're at my house because I'm very likely to talk you into getting dressed if I think you're going to work for something, and I frequently do that to Alex. But these are friends of mine. They do fabulous 1860s civilian impressions, and he is quite entertaining. You can see I have a lot of really wacko pictures of him. And we'll see if you can tell, but Alex is laughing because he's constantly taunting the ones being photographed, so we're always laughing. But we had the actual measurements of the stagecoach, and Alex set that up for me using just cheap styrofoam. You can see it held together by clips. But it worked really well. Very easy to do, and it worked well. And that's the resulting painting. And to get the legs, which belonged to him, I sat him on top of my SUV. So anyway, and that's Jim, my husband. Can you see him? He's sleeping. I didn't have to dress him up for that one, because you can only see his head. All right, and this is another one where it's a different situation where I had the models where I wanted to paint them, which is ideal, but it doesn't always happen. And so once I had the resulting photos, then once I was home and thinking about what I wanted to say in the painting, I decided I wanted them to be 1849, and they were young men in the Northeast when the newspaper started to run articles about the gold rush going on in California. So I looked up handbills, which are quite common. So these are original handbills that I got online, printed one out, and then decided I set this up at home. The pitcher, the dishes, these are all from the period. This is a repro. And so I shot that at home, and then that's the resulting painting. Then I draw it the way I want it to be. All right. So finally, the last 2 pages, I thought I would show you these are reference shots from my project. So it's just kind of a sampling of the type of images I do and the people that are so graciously give me their time. And we do this actually at a historic village museum in upstate New York. I pretty much have almost anything that I need for the project there except for wagons, but I know where to get those. And then some more pictures of people. You'll probably recognize that because from the photo shoot, the painting, and the exhibit. And Couture was pregnant during the trip, so we patted her out right there during a photo shoot. I actually flew him and her to Wyoming 2 summers ago because I had access to some accurate reproduction prairie schooners. And they allowed us to climb in and out of them, take the covers off, do whatever we wanted. So it was wonderful. And this is the little boy who lives in Wyoming, who's my Jesse from the journal. So, and then finally, a tribute to my husband right here. This is a photo shoot I did a few years ago in Oregon along the Columbia Gorge, River Gorge. And this stream does not look treacherous, but it was very treacherous. It was quite wide, very rocky, and rushing water, freezing cold. And when you walked across it, it was very uncomfortable because the rocks would move and shift. And if you paused, you would start to sink. And she insisted on carrying both of her kids. I'm like, one is enough. And she was unsteady because it's painful walking across, and she insists, she likes to live history. She's one of the ideal kind of reenactors to have as a model, because she goes beyond what I ask her to do, because she likes to experience history. So she did not want to wear her shoes, because trust me, I was in that water, it was painful to walk on those rocks. And I just was afraid she was going to drop one of those kids. So I'm following her across myself in the water, shooting her, and I told Jim to go spot her in case one of the kids needed to be, taken. So, but anyway. Yeah.